Well, hello and welcome to Dig Deeper. It's great to have you with us. I'm joined today, of course, by my friend and co-host, Dr. Stephen Backhouse. It's good to see you, Steve. I see the sun is shining.
I'm feeling good. You're the one who said you have a cold. So
yeah, I'm a bit coldy, fluey, but I'm trying not to make too much of a meal of it. I have it easy compared to others. So particularly in the light of everything that's going on in the world right now, and so we are here and we're looking through the book of Ephesians, and we're looking at chapter 2 today, continuing on where we left off last week. And if this is your first time joining us on Dig Deeper, very warm welcome to you. We've been going now, this is our third season. We looked at Mark's Gospel over lockdown, then into the Sermon on the Mount, and now we find ourselves in Ephesians. And of course, you can download any of the previous episodes on our podcast or on our website if you choose. So Ephesians 2 we're looking at today, and we're looking at Ephesians 2 beginning at verse 11, and I'm going to read from N.T. Wright's version, and then we're going to get stuck into this. So then, remember this: in human terms, that is, in your flesh, you are Gentiles. You are the people whom the so-called circumcision refer to as the so-called uncircumcision. Circumcision, of course, being something done by human hands to human flesh. Well, once upon a time, you were separated from the king. You were detached from the community of Israel. You were foreigners to the covenants which contained the promise. There you were, in the world with no hope and no God. But now in King Jesus, you have been brought near in the King's blood. Yes, you, who used to be a long way away. He is our peace, you see. He has made the two to be one. He has pulled down the barrier, the dividing wall that turns us into enemies of each other. He has done this in his flesh by abolishing the law with its commands and instructions. The point of doing all this was to create in him one new human being out of the two, so making peace. God was reconciling both of us to himself in a single body through the cross by killing the enmity in him. So the Messiah came and gave the good news. Peace had come. Peace, that is, for those of you who were a long way away, and peace too for those who were close at hand. Through him, you see, we both have access to the Father in one spirit. This is the result. You are no longer foreigners or strangers. No, you are fellow citizens with God's holy people. You are members of God's household. You are built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with King Jesus himself as the cornerstone. In him, the whole building is fitted together and grows into a holy temple in the Lord. You too are being built up together in him, into a place where God will live by the Spirit.
Oh, good. Oh, John, I can see that this is going to be really relevant to what we wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, the language that he uses is of building, but also right at the end, I want to just point out, so 20 to 22.
Yep.
In whom the whole structure being joined together grows into a holy temple. So in whom you also are being built together. Paul uses dynamic language. It's a work in progress, first of all. So the thing he's contrasting, you were alienated, you were dead in your ways, you were whatever, you're outsiders, but now you are part of a thing that's growing. You're part of a thing that's developing. So the new thing that Paul institutes is not a settled thing.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's worth pointing out, that he's not saying you were in that building, now you're in this building. It's more like you were in that building or you were outside and now you're in a living, growing building that hasn't been finished yet.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like a body and it's kind of like a temple. And that's the weird imagery he uses. And that's probably worth pointing out right from the start.
Yeah. And it seems here, the critical thing, of course, contextually, is that the early church, one of the significant divisions that was emerging is whether you were part of the Jewish inherited believers. Of course, Christianity was originally viewed as a sect of Judaism, and then Gentiles start joining the church. You get it in Acts 15. You get, what do we now do? How many of the Jewish practices do we maintain? What do we do about the purity laws around eating? What do we do about circumcision? So this is what's emerging here.
Yeah.
And Paul is trying to say, well, in a sense, neither of you are right. You created a division, but Jesus, like you just said, Stephen, is creating something new, doing a new thing.
And this is that whole thing of, this idea of supersessionism.
Yeah.
Which is, it's difficult to talk about this because there's so much baggage. It's almost impossible not to slip into bad habits. I slip into bad habits all the time, and it's almost impossible not to. But what the bad habit is to read these texts as if they are Jews are bad, Christians are good. Jews represent old legalism and religion. Christianity represents freedom and faith, grace over works, and this kind of thing. So this is the way that we're just completely habituated to read these texts, right?
Yeah.
And then we read them like, oh, Paul is inviting Gentiles. He's reminding Jews that they are ethnically misogynist, or they're racist, and he's trying to break down Jewish ethnic privilege in order to welcome Gentiles in, right? So this is, and I probably have said that before, and I think there's an element there, but I also have to really quickly be reminded that it's not that easy because what Paul is not doing here. So I think the first thing to remember is that Paul is Jewish and he thinks he's Jewish. He's not thinking he's anything else. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus is Jewish. Jesus isn't thinking he's anything else. So everything Paul is writing is he's writing as a Jewish thinker who is trying to talk about being Jewish.
Yeah.
He's not sweeping Judaism away and replacing it with something new.
Yeah.
He's doing something else. Now that was what we would call supersessionism, which would be Christianity has superseded Israel.
Got it.
Or Judaism. And all the old language that Jews used about themselves, Christians now have new definitions, right? So law and temple and Israel, all those words that mean something to the Hebrews now mean something new to the Christians. And so there is some truth there's an element of truth in that, which is why it's really hard to talk about this without kind of slipping into that old bad habit. Well,
and of course, Paul does that, doesn't he? In Romans, for example, he has a whole couple of chapters on the new Israel, even just that alone.
But that's the point exactly. The new Israel. Paul is not sweeping it away and replacing it with something that he thinks is new. He is working really hard like a swan paddling desperately. If you look underneath the surface, you'll see his feet paddling furiously in order to maintain the calm appearance on top of the water. Paul is paddling furiously, not to replace Israel, but to show that his Jewishness has continued, like what it is now. Like it's the new Judaism, or it's the fulfillment. And they're really using that language. I haven't come to abolish, but to fulfill.
Yes.
So Paul is not thinking I'm sweeping away Judaism and replacing it with something new. He's saying Judaism this is what it is now. It is growing. It's changed, it's growing, but it hasn't been replaced. It's what it is, right?
And that's utterly in alignment with what Jesus did, of course.
Yeah.
Jesus was exactly as you said. He came to fulfill that. We talked about that in a previous episode. I can't remember one of our previous episodes that we talked about when we were looking at the Sermon on the Mount. I came to fulfill the law, not to abolish it. What does that look like?
Yeah.
But he definitely came as a Jewish man in a Jewish context to the Jewish people. But
this is where you notice that what Paul is doing in Ephesians, he's not bringing the Gentile. He's not saying Judaism is bad, Gentile is bad, let's create something new. He's not saying that. He's saying actually the opposite. He's saying Gentiles, you are foreigners, you are far away. Jews, you're a lot closer. Gentiles are now joining the Jews, and together Judaism is changing because it's now involving Gentiles. So he's not saying it's we don't want either. He's actually grafting Gentiles, of which you and I are Gentiles,
Yes.
into something which he still thinks is Judaism. Okay.
Okay.
2,000 years later, we have a hard time thinking of that. We don't think of Christianity as Judaism anymore.
No.
And that has led to, I mean, that is the baggage, which I think is almost impossible not to really have. But we have to try and read Paul not as a Christian, right? He's not a Christian.
Yeah.
He doesn't use that language for himself ever. He's not a Christian. He's a Pharisee. He's a Jewish teacher. He calls himself a Pharisee at some point. That's what he is. So, and he's saying this is what it looks like now, and it's fulfilled, and it's now changed, and the walls have been enlarged, and we're a temple. We're still a temple, but it's a growing temple. It's changing, right?
Well, and
so that's the language.
Then, as you said, the baggage that we carry because we don't have these associations anymore with our Jewish roots. If you spoke to most people the majority of people in a British context in a church, it wasn't a Messianic Jewish congregation, but it was a mainstream denomination within the church, and you said you are grafted into the Jewish,
right?
It would be like it's like a foreign language. It just wouldn't translate, and it's also very hard for people to know what that means. I know. Does that mean that we embrace the traditions? Does that mean we and that's exactly? I mean, if there are echoes that are still around, if you started stimulating that conversation with your congregation, that would ask the same questions that Paul is addressing here about circumcision or about food or about what does that therefore mean? Exactly. Okay, fine, I accept it, John, that we are part of this Jewish inheritance. What does that really mean for us?
And you can see the two problems that happen, right? One problem would be to think, oh, everything Jewish is bad and old, so let's get rid of it. And the other side would be everything sort of traditionally Jewish is exactly what we should be doing all the time, as if nothing has changed. And those are the two options that you often see within modern Christendom, by the way. Yeah. And my friend, the rabbi who I do that podcast with, he's very funny about Messianic Jews. He kind of looks at evangelical Christians who then start to do like Passover and keep the Sabbath and do all the kind of Messianic Judaism stuff. And he says they're just culturally appropriating something, because modern day Judaism is also 2,000 years old. Like, modern day Judaism isn't copying the scriptures. They have the same relationship of time and distance to their Hebrew scriptures as we do, as Christians do. And it's not like modern day Jews are following. They also have a reason why they don't keep Leviticus and Deuteronomy and they don't do all that stuff either, right? So when modern day Christians go, oh, I guess we're grafted into Judaism, and then they look to their neighbors in a synagogue, that's not what Paul's talking about either, right? We have to kind of forget about this. It isn't, modern day Jews are not following Paul's form of Judaism either, okay? There's quite a lot of history going on, which is why you have to do a lot of hard work. It's not as easy as just saying, oh, they're Jewish, therefore that's what we must be like, because modern day Jews aren't like what you see in the Hebrew scriptures either. You know? And
I mean, but then that goes back to the first point that you made about this, which is that the body is a living thing. It's not a settled thing. And so actually we should expect 2,000 years on that it looks and feels very different. It's a global in every sense community of people that are followers of the way of Jesus, you know.
Well, and this is there is an element here of one of the things that I think gets changed, not destroyed, but changed, is that Paul and other Hebrews or Jewish people are learning that one of the things that's changing is that kind of strict adherence to what we would recognize as ethnic purity, right? So that, no, we are Jewish, but we're no longer defined by our bloodlines. It's a Judaism that has Gentiles in it as well, right? So that's one of the things that changes, and it does have a universal or a global element to it. But note that Paul and the other early Christians are using Jewish traditions of global religion. They're not using Gentile versions. So they're saying, look, it says in our scriptures, we're going to be a light to the Gentiles. We're going to be a light to the nations. That's what's happening now, right? Yeah. So they're actually using Hebrew scriptures to talk about how Hebrew religion is now global.
Yeah. Okay.
They're not saying, look at what these Greek philosophers think. They think that all humanity is a global body, so we should bring those ideas into Judaism. They're not doing that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a universal and global kind of aspect to Paul's thinking, but he thinks he's being Jewish when he does it.
Yeah.
If that
So
makes sense.
so then we talked a lot about what it isn't.
Yeah.
So what is it? What is this thing that Paul is talking about? This new community, this new body, this new temple. What are the things that we know it is?
Well, he uses the word peace a lot, and I wanted to look at the word peace. So, now in Christ Jesus, who you were once far off, have been brought near by the blood of Christ, for he himself is our peace. This is
verse 14. Yeah.
Who has broken down the dividing wall of hostility, right? And then again, verse 15, that he might create himself a new man in place of two, making peace, and might reconcile. So the new body, the new temple, the new whatever that Paul is saying we're all part of now is a place of peace. And that's imagery that he uses a lot. It's imagery that actually the early church, Peter uses it a lot. And this is one of these things where a conversation is being had with Jews and Gentiles, because in the Gentile world, the Greek speaking pagan kind of cultures, the word peace was very politically charged. I probably mentioned this before. So peace was peace was provided by a minor god. There was a god who provided peace. There was a god of peace, who then the Roman Empire kind of elevated this minor god. And this is where you get the phrase, the peace of Rome, Pax Romana, right? It's the Roman Empire kind of assumed for itself the mantle of this divine gift, so that Rome itself, the empire, the Gentile empire of Rome, had taken on for itself, said, we provide peace. And so there's like a political and a spiritual dynamic here. That word is really loaded. It's a Gentile word that would really mean something to the people in Ephesus, by the way.
And does it, I mean, maybe completely offbeat, but it gives that sense, if Rome is providing the peace, it kind of has that totalitarian sense in which we provide peace through our very strict rules and regulations and laws
and violence, right? Enmity. So Rome provides its peace through the point of a sword. And
so that goes back to that bit that Jesus talks about. He said, I didn't come to bring peace.
Yeah, I'm not coming to bring that kind of peace. And also later on, you say there's peace, but there is no peace. Jesus says, I bring peace that transcends all human understanding. Paul says, do as much as you can to live at peace with everyone. Later on in Ephesians, Paul is going to he's going to be satirical. He's going to list all of the Roman soldiers' outfit.
Yeah.
Right? He's going to go put on the armor of God. And it's a satire, because Rome brings peace through its soldiers, which is actually a form of oppression. So it's peace through oppression.
Well, it's completely oxymoronic.
Right. And Jesus brings peace through his own death. So Rome brings peace through oppressing others. Jesus brings peace
through violence,
through being oppressed. He was the victim of suffering. He didn't inflict suffering. And this is part of that story of this is how enmity between humans is going to be broken down. Not through endless domination of one group over another, but through self-sacrifice, right? So the temple, the new thing being built, is not a temple of one group dominating over another. It's a temple being built by different people being grafted into each other. Yeah. And so the peace aspect is really important to Paul and to the early Christians. And it, like I said, it's vibrating with satire against Rome. Whenever you see the word peace, it's doing more work than just a fuzzy feeling in your heart. It's a political statement they're making of this is where peace happens, and look at the way we do it. It's different. Yeah. Yeah. And then Jesus is there's this word of being a cornerstone. Yeah. And it's funny because we often think that that means the foundation. I missed this until I was doing research for this talk that we're having right now. I always miss this because there's two imagery going on with Jesus and cornerstone. Sometimes some parts of the New Testament talk about Jesus as the foundation stone. that people trip over, right?
Okay.
But Paul here is talking about Jesus as the capstone, which is not a foundation stone, it's the top.
It's the
and he
top,
says,
yeah.
actually, the apostles and the prophets are the foundation. And Jesus is he's the cap. He's the lovely ornate brick that goes on top of the building that we are building.
Yeah.
Whereas other parts of the Bible talk about Jesus as the foundation upon which other people have to be built. So just notice what's happening here. Paul is actually not talking about foundations here. He's talking about capstones. So,
well, we're going to take a break. We have talked about what it means for us to be this new, living, ever-changing, morphing thing where Jesus is the capstone of this new body. We're going to look at that, what that means for some of the kind of cultural conversations that are happening right now.
Yes.
So we'll be back in a minute. Well, welcome back from your tea break, whatever you've gone to do. We're going to tackle the second half and look at what this passage then means for us as people who are followers of the way of Jesus, that when we gather together, that is what Paul talks about as the church. But there's some cultural conversations happening right now. And Stephen, do you want to just kind of set us off?
Well, I don't know how much of your people who listen to this in your church know that I have a kind of I don't know what the word would be, a global I have an international platform. It's very small. I'm not saying it's big, but I run a podcast and I also work quite a lot with churches in North America, in Canada, in America, in Ireland, in Germany. Got some Scandinavian churches and listeners, Brazilians. Like, I do have little pockets of international people all over the world. And I have to say, one of the things I've really noticed, and I noticed it I'm not going to divulge any private details of my friends here, but in talking to friends recently as well, especially young people, kind of, young adults, just a huge sea change between people who can no longer be part of church or Christianity as it is, and yet really still love Jesus. So churchy people look at these people who no longer want to go to church anymore, and they go, oh, they've lost their faith.
Mm.
But if you go and actually talk to them like I have, or when you get emails from them like I do every week, these are people with like tears in their eyes saying how much they love Jesus. And they do not see Christianity reflecting Jesus. And that's why they can't be part of this church anymore.
Mm.
And I think Corona lockdown knocked people out of habits. They would habitually go to church. And I think Corona meant that people kind of couldn't do that anymore. And so it gave them space to rethink. I think, I know you don't want to get too into politics here, but I do think like the Trumpy moment and the evangelical nationalism, just the real rise in that. And in this country, the Brexit as well, not that all Brexit is all nationalist, but let's be honest, there's a lot of Brexit that's rarely nationalist. And Christians have largely gone very pro-nationalism in lots of different countries around the world. And a lot of people I'm talking to, they look at that and they're like repulsed by that morally. It's not intellectually. It's not like they don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God or that he rose from the dead. They're like, Christians aren't good anymore. They like bad things. They're kind of on the side of like jingoism and violence and racism and like and I'm noticing this a lot, right? And so this is like a problem that I've diagnosed, but I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah. Well, I think
so. Yeah, we've been talking about this, right? You and I offline have been talking about like, because I don't think the solution is, oh well, let's just start another church.
Right.
That's the solution that Christians have always had. I don't like this current group. I'm just going to start a new one.
Well, that's why you've got thousands of denominations in the US alone, just
that's why the US Christianity is so rotten, to be perfectly frank, is that precise thing. Like, oh, let's just do it ourselves. We'll just start again. We're a law to ourselves. We'll move down the road and we've got the Bible and we don't need to compromise. We don't need to lay down our lives for anyone else. We'll just start again. And that leads us to bullies and nationalists and triumphant.
Well, and also it kind of flies in the face of everything that this passage talks about here, which is about laying down your own sense of what's right. I think you have a lovely phrase you use all the time. What's that phrase you use?
About clutching tightly.
Yeah, clutching tightly to that, which is
don't clutch tightly to what's rightfully yours.
Yeah, there's a sense in which we feel, oh, this is ours. So we've found a little group that clutch tightly to these, and so we're going to set up our own group. That's exactly how the new churches have been set up.
And then the other thing you've noticed is people, like, what were you saying about people going it on their own? What happens to people who leave community completely?
Well, then it just dissolves. There's all the there's a word that we haven't used yet, but the word deconstruction, this idea that you pull things apart. It's like pulling a thread of a sweater without any desire to reconstruct, without any desire to look at what it might be. And you know, you and I go way back when I was at theological college, where you and I studied together. I was for years kind of part of the kind of conversations that are happening in the UK, not at any significant level, but around what was called then the emerging church, those that were kind of, and my observation in lots of ways, and this is, I don't mean this is an unfair critique, but a lot of it was a pulling apart without a rebuilding.
Right.
And and so I think there is a sense in which I think my view on it is actually it's a discipleship issue. I think we've got here we don't have a space in which we can ask the theologically challenging questions and do that in a context of faith where any question can be asked and anyone can wrestle with these things without being shunned or no, they're, you know, all this kind of stuff. And actually having a space where we can say, actually, I'm not too sure. I don't know what I do. I don't know what I think about that. And I don't know how this particular thing resonates with the person of Jesus. And I don't think we've created spaces in a kind of catechism way,
because we're not,
where people can wrestle with that stuff.
This is where I felt this passage that we're looking at now is like, I wonder whether, if I look at it with the lens of what I'm thinking about today or right now, I wonder what this means when I read this. And one of the things I noticed was the living building, right? So because I think amongst my friends or the people that are coming to me, and I myself, I'm not separate from this. If you try and have those conversations within a lot of existing church structures today, or church cultures, the church cultures are very brittle. They're very rigid. They're like, we don't have room for that. If you're asking those questions, if you're feeling these feelings, you're not on board. Like, you're not part of us anymore. We just don't know what to do with you. And that is the indication of an institution that is not growing. Like, it's not supple.
Yeah.
Right? It's an institution which has already decided what its boundaries are or what its walls are. And they've already decided that they've stopped. They've drawn the line and said, this is it. We're not changing anymore. And anybody who's not with the program has lost their faith. And I think that that's a real major issue here.
Yeah.
Is that the church is not Anglicanism. It's not being a Baptist. It's not evangelical or whatever. It's a living body.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if these young people are leaving the institution, whose fault is that? Like, if these young people who are genuinely seeking and they latch on to words like deconstruction because it seems to be offering what their heart is feeling, I mean, whose fault is that? Like, I really don't want to be one of these institutional people who stands within the institution and says, oh, you are deluded, or you are in rebellion, or you are backsliding. You should just join our program. It's like, no, actually, no, I think the program is what needs changing. I really do.
Yeah.
I think we need to have relation over vision again. And right now we usually work in vision over relation. We just say, oh, if you're not part of our vision, you're not part of us.
And we work primarily in the gathered and not in the micro. In the macro and rather than the micro, we a lot of our energy goes into sustaining the thing rather than working out where those relationships of place can be a place of safety where people can ask the question. I mean, I was looking at this passage, and it says, you know, he is our peace. We talked about peace before. This is speaking of Jesus. He has made the two to be one. He has pulled down the barrier, the dividing wall that turns us into enemies of each other. And and so there's a sense in which we've got to create that space where that is what we do, and where people can ask those kind of questions.
Also, I mean, notice
Yeah.
that in Ephesians, Paul is working really hard to, he says, you Gentiles, you are strangers, you are aliens. Like, he uses this language of like being completely isolated, and he's bringing them into something like a family, which he then calls a body. Sometimes he says it's a family, and sometimes he says it's one body, or a temple. He uses three different images, right? But some of the work you need to do is like, we're so individualistic here that we think of belief as like something you choose for yourself, right? And this would be the problem that we see amongst our deconstructing friends or whatever, where they're like, well, I don't like the corporate life, so I'm just gonna go by myself.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is, well, certainly in the first century, certainly in this Ephesians type context, like you didn't make up your own ideas for yourself. You were joined. That belief was about joining a movement. Like you are part of a people. That's the whole point. Like it's forms of life that come to you from a movement that you are a part of. That's what's forming your identity.
Yeah.
And so Paul is here not sort of saying to people, go your own way and make up your own minds. He's saying we are forming the family that you need to have belief, right?
Yeah.
So there is something there about like the vision here in the New Testament of Jesus is not one of like, leave your old associations and go your own way. It's leave your old associations and be part of a new association.
And I think when you described, the rise of the association, particularly in North America, of nationalism and well, not just North America, actually across our world, nationalism and those that kind of would pertain to the evangelical world.
Well, it's kind of a Christian nationalism. So it's like Christians who are more care about Christianity than they do about Jesus. So they're more concerned about like preserving their Christian culture. Right.
And I think a big part of that, whether that's at a political level or indeed at a church level, actually what's driven behind that a lot of the time is fear.
Right. Yeah.
It's I've heard it said there are two forces in the world: love and fear. And actually, when you're fearful of that person in your congregation who might be asking the difficult questions, when you're fearful rather than loving, it creates a different environment for that individual. And so for us, the church, it's about how do we foster the kind of love. We talked about offline before. It's actually, I don't think the answer is to disintegrate any community body of believers and we all end up, because I don't think that leads to anything good either. I think for me as a church leader, it's about how do we continually point people to Jesus rather than to an institutional thing, and actually kind of lead people to a way where they are responding to the call of Jesus on their lives as part of this whole entity, not as an individual, but as a corporate sense of an identity. And that's what he talks about here. You're citizens. You're no longer foreigners or strangers. You're citizens with God's holy people. And the whole point about being a citizen is that you are with others in that, and that corporate sense of who we are. And I think it's for me, it's about what does it look like for us, the church, to redeem it from within, so that we're pointing people to the person of Jesus. In that way, but you're right. These questions are alive for people right now, and ones where it really, this passage particularly, what does it look like for us to? Okay, our differences may not be Jews and Gentiles in that sense, but what are the differences that actually, when we walk into our church community, that feels fractious or difficult, and how can we be people where we lay those things down for the sake of the other, and that's what it speaks of. That's what it means to be at peace. Well,
it's good, man.
We're coming to, that is time up now. We're coming to the end of our time together. We're going to skip on to chapter 3 next week. And we're looking forward for you tuning in. Like I said, if you're tuning in live as it is on Thursday, then on our YouTube channel, then you are very welcome. But indeed, if you're catching up on podcast or in any other way, then it's great to have you with us. Join us next week at 8 o'clock on Thursday, if not in any other form. And we look forward to seeing you there. Take care.